Sometimes it just takes a wardrobe to teach you a lesson. Let me explain.
That was tricky. I want to know what you mean by that.
I did that on purpose, maybe. I don't know. It just came to me. Welcome back, everybody. This is Books, Banter, and Beyond. That's my mom, Karen. I am Rob, and we are your hosts on another literary journey here. So, yes, if you haven't figured out what the wardrobe is, you probably haven't read C.S. Lewis. And if not, where have you been? As we know, C.S. Lewis wrote an entire Narnia series. We're going to just go over the first one because each book is actually fairly long as it is. But the question we're going to ask kind of takes us on a journey through religion and literature, which we've kind of talked about before. So the question we asked is, how does religion and literature teach you to get your voice, to get your courage? And nothing says better than a talking lion, right? So in the first book, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, the children find a magical wardrobe that when you walk through it, you enter this fantasy world known as Narnia. And again, if you haven't read it, go read it.
It's really cool. It's really cool. I mean, when you think about it, and as a child, I am sure when you were growing up, how cool would that be, right? Just walk right through. How cool.
I was very angry that my closet wouldn't walk into a magical world, and I wanted to just make a hole in the wall. No, But so after the children go through, they meet a bunch of mystical creatures that talk. They meet Aslan the lion, and they find out that the evil witch has been, taken over the world there, and it's up to the four children plus this group of, mythical people to basically take back the land and restore peace and order. Sound kind of familiar, right? That's like every fantasy book out there. But what's different here, and I think if everybody knows here, we'll get into the spoilers now. C.S. Lewis did write a lot about Christianity. He was a devout Christian. A lot of his books were actually based in biblical terms, so much so that the lion, Aslan, actually represented Jesus in the storyline here.
Right, a Christ-like.
Yeah, the Christ, the Savior, right? So with that being said, what are the morals of the story here? And with this, the morals here, we learn, honesty and integrity, forgiveness, self-sacrifice, and of course, the question of the day, courage.
Mm-hmm.
So you, mom, or others watching might think, how does that work? How does a talking lion and a bunch of children teach you how to find your voice? And it did take me a few to kind of break it down, but I think this is one of those times where it's not the character, it's the idea. It's the Bible story behind it, right? It's the idea that in order to be good, and it's kind of funny because we shot the other video talking about good versus common sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, being good really means actually finding your purpose, your mainstream. So before we go on to, I know we talked about a Star Wars book a while back and talked about the Adam and Eve thing here. What is it you think is so intriguing of authors? And again, maybe it's the time frame when religion was a bigger deal. What is it that you think brings religion and literature together? Or do you think there is a connection at all?
I don't know. I think that anything biblical, they're great stories, right? The Bible is all about stories, and whether, depending on what religion you follow, the stories either make sense or true, or they're a fable, or they're meant to be a message or something to learn from. I mean, what we haven't even talked about is that it's children, right?
Right.
And so it's children. And the lion, when I think of the lion, I think of, the Wizard of Oz, the lion who didn't have courage. He was looking for his courage. Now, and I don't know what year this was, if this was written before.
Well, it's actually funny. I was going to bring up that this actually was happening during World War II, which actually brings a lot of historical reference to.
Right. So, I mean, to answer your question, I mean, I don't know. I mean, as I said, I think it's curious, but understandable because he does come from a Christian background, and that's, so it's everything comes out of that.
Right.
But I am more curious of the fact that he uses children, to be the ones that discover, and then the picture, the visual of the lion, who we generally think is courageous. But of course, my mind went to Wizard of Oz, but knowing that this was written well. But again, it's interesting because writers will use animals, right, to
Right.
represent. And here's two different writers who wrote, one being not courageous and one being obviously representing courage, right?
And the other thing I was going to bring up too, because we've talked about Lord of the Rings as well. Again, he also came from an era where the war was going on. I think Tolkien was actually in the war, so
Right.
his battles were legitimately from real life to page. Right, he
Right.
literally wrote what was going on. So there's a lot to it, and I think a lot of people tend to shy away when you bring up the word religion, stuff like that. But I think for me, even because for me, me, I'm very picky on what I read generally, but it works well if you understand Lewis's upbringing and you
Right.
understand where he was coming from and you understand it was World War II. But you're right. The thing, now that you said the whole children thing, it is funny. It's funny and it's not, because I know a lot of time back in that day, a lot of people that were fighting in the war were in their teens, in their 20s. They were fairly young, right?
Right.
So maybe Lewis said, hey, you're sending in babies basically to fight a global pandemic when
Right.
you should be sending in maybe the older people, the you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it is kind of an interesting.
I might even say, or though we like to say that children are the future of our world. Children are
Okay, okay.
saving the world. Children are going to save the world. We hope, because us adults have screwed it up enough as it is. But the children, and I think that we have this tendency to look to our children and say, the world is going to be yours, and what you do next will make a difference. So I do think it's cool that there's kids involved in this, because I think at the end of the day, we all put a lot of faith in our kids, and we all hope that there will be a better world out there, and if they're part of making that better world, all the better. So
Okay, all right. And I'm, because as you were talking, I was trying to think if there's any other storyline where the main character is a kid in this format. Nothing comes to mind. There's a lot of other fantasies, like I think Lemony Snicket books. Those were all kids, but it was a different kind of story. So I think Lewis may have had something here that other authors probably didn't want to touch.
right. Also, Rob, I think kids until they get older and they lose it. Kids have a great way to make up things and to have that creativity in their mind. Nothing stops them,
Right.
but as adults, our fears stop us and all this other stuff. And I know that's one of the themes in here, is the facing your fears. But I think kids generally, right, they're fearless. You guys are fearless. Well, you're not a kid anymore, but fearless. think
I
about
wish I
think
was.
about kids.
But it's actually funny you brought that up, because as the stories go on, and I know there was the movies and stuff, the older kids are actually taken out of the book because they become an adult, right? And it's up to the remaining younger children
Exactly.
to keep up.
It's up to the future, the kid. And I think that is actually a theme. Now that I'm actually looking at this, seriously having this conversation with you, I think there's a message there, that as they got older, they were no longer there. It was the kids. It had to be the kids that were going to change the world. And I don't know. I kind of believe that. I kind of believe that, which is why I think we need to leave our world a little bit better than we are right now. So
Okay, no, actually, I like that, because I never, like, while I was writing all this stuff, that did not cross my mind. But when I'm hearing it, it does make a lot of sense. So maybe in a way, finding your courage is not just the biblical side, the character, but maybe it's also kind of trusting your inner instincts.
right,
Maybe it's your inner child and going, okay, what? In a way, it's actually kind of like the Star Wars book we
right,
talked about a couple other things ago, when we talked about what are you going to do? Are you going to do things based on your brain, your heart, or your smarts? Like, what are you going to do
right.
when it comes down to it? And I think finding courage is different for everybody. And I think something like Bible story, something like fable, something like whatever is the perfect way to teach it, because there's
Yeah,
no one way to do it.
right,
And, for me, somebody who does things my own way in real life, you definitely can find your courage
right.
in an unexpected way, right? And
Do
yeah,
you think that the challenges that they faced, that these siblings that they face? Does it parallel what others in real life struggle? Do you think that these are it was really like more?
I mean, I think because he was writing it when he was writing it, and even in the book, I think he brings up the fact that the children were hid because the war was going on. So inadvertently, he basically brought Narnia into the real world because he was talking about how these four children didn't need to be in the middle of this war, and they ended up finding this magic door
Right.
into another place. So yeah, the challenges they had to deal with, the fact that they jumped into this world and they're like, what? Huh? Like, what is going on here? You're talking animals, you have witches, you have sorcery. Like the first off is they're going, what are we doing here? Like, what the hell is going on? And then they had to realize, okay, so we're here. We kind of got to help. So let's see what we can do. So I think the challenge is real life parallel.
And it clearly is utilizing, religious symbolism. I mean, do you think this book would work without the religious symbolism?
I mean, knowing what I know, it's funny to answer when you know what you know. Knowing what I know, the answer is definitely no. You need the symbolism there. If you look at it from just a fantasy, a book, I guess you still get the same ending, but I think at the end of the day, because it's so heavily inundated with real life beliefs, I'm going to have to stick with no. I think you really need a strong religion, whatever it is, to move this story along. Now, what I would say is if anybody's read the series, it kind of lessens as you go. So I think when you get to the third or fourth book, it's really more adventure, to me at least, than it was at the beginning. But I think to start it off, he did this on purpose. I mean, he wrote this in a way that works. So I definitely think you need some knowledge of religion to put the pieces together, I think.
So, I mean, do you remember how old you were when you first read this book?
It's been a while since I actually read through this. I mean, I reread a little bit a couple weeks ago to kind of refresh.
Right.
I
guess the question I'm about to ask you is, I think more younger people read this book because it's like, it's not required reading, but it's like one of the books that as a kid, right? People read this, right? Do you think it has the same attraction as an adult? As you're watching this right now, people, and you say, you know what, I never actually read that. I think I'm going to go read it. Do you think as an adult that we come to it differently than as children?
I mean, the worst part of book questions is that they're also open ended. That everybody has their own right.
Right.
But I mean, if I'm really gonna answer, like that, I think it's a specific niche for people. Lord of the Rings is, I guess, what you kind of call like high fantasy. It's a lot of detail. It's a lot of really engrossing stuff. You have fantasy that's maybe like, I don't know if you remember Pete's Dragon and that Disney one. It's kind of more fun-loving fantasy. You have Game of Thrones that kind of blends serious, hardcore fighting with kind of some comedy mixed in. C.S. Lewis, I think, is kind of like, I'm writing this book for those of you who follow what I do or who read what I read.
Okay.
And if you like it, you do. If you don't, whatever. It's almost like he kind of wrote it for other people who maybe are in religious studies or maybe study a lot of stuff. And it doesn't just have to be Christianity. It could be, Muslim, Judaism, whatever. But I think his books will strike it more for somebody who maybe is in a business of religious studies. Maybe somebody like, I know when you were a cantor, when you did the rabbi stuff, those people that are in the position of religious,
in the religion business.
Right. I know that sounds very bad, but those people, I think, will get more out of it. I think people will appreciate a good fantasy, but I think you have to go in knowing what you're about to read. And I think this is one of those books that if I were to recommend, I would just say, hey, there's a lot of themes in here. Check on those themes before read. It's kind of like the trigger warning, right? You know, it may not be a gross theme, but it's a theme that not everybody necessarily is comfortable with, right?
Right.
So
Okay. And maybe this is a thing where you read it with your child and discuss. If
I'll give you a really weird comparison. It's kind of like Winnie the Pooh. You wouldn't necessarily read Winnie the Pooh as an adult for the fun of it per se, but if you had a kid, you would read Winnie the Pooh. So
Yes.
that's kind of where I think it's going. It's kind of one of those, if you have the person there to read it with, that's why you're reading.
Got it. So now you have lots of fantasy books sitting in the bookstore that we're going to share, and you mentioned some of them. You didn't mention this one yet, but The Hobbit, right?
Right. So I think one of the biggest epics we have the entire set here, obviously starting with The Hobbit. This brings us back to the beginning of the Lord of the Rings saga. And then, of course, we have, I believe,
Yeah,
Fellowship.
The Fellowship. So, guys,
Uh,
take your phone out, start scanning these. We got a bunch. I'll hold it just for a sec. You have enough time. And then we have another one, The Two Towers.
so this is the second in that trilogy there.
Right. And then the third is
We get the final epic battle right there at the Return of the King.
And then,
So this is a big one, definitely a big saga.
right. And you have a bunch of other books in there, right? You have the Game of Thrones.
We do have Game of Thrones, yeah, and this is book one. So if you did want to start, this is our special leather bound edition, really neat. But again, this is another book too. If you wanted an epic saga, start there. I know I have a couple on me here. We got Mercedes Lackey, her Foundation series. We have the Redwall. If you want more talking animals, this is it right here. It's basically Disney's Robin Hood, but more like in depth.
Right.
We have Feist here. We got so many. I mean, we have a kind of fantasy. We have a kind of all genres for everybody. So if you don't want a fantasy, I think we're going to put up the things.
I'm gonna put up a screen right now. So hey guys, what there's merchandise, there's comic books, paperbacks, hardbound books, and really the prices are amazing. And if you just want to start, building out your library with fantasy, this is the place to go. Go check it out. Rob, any last minute thoughts about this really cool story?
I got to say, and it kind of goes to your question of as an adult, does it hit differently than as a kid? It definitely, it wasn't what I remember when I read it as an adult. It took me a minute to kind of get in there. I did it on audiobooks, so it was very, all different character voices, all that stuff. It was good. It's definitely something I recommend, but I think just out of pure, respect to those who maybe want themes, check out the themes before. You can Google and just see what the themes of the book are. If any of them might be a little too touching for you, that's understandable. But if you think you're going to like this kind of book, go check it out. I think the entire series, I don't know, 6 books altogether. It's a long saga, so get ready if you're going to jump in. You're going to be in there for a while. But yeah, it's a good story. It's a good story.
Sounds great. Well, Rob, as always, lots and lots of fun. If you have just tuned in, check out the bookstore. We'll see you next time on Books Banter and beyond. Goodbye, everyone.